What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the Raw Prospect Podcast. My name is Imy Nixon. Today is August the 4th, 2022, and we're recording episode 113. I want to thank you all for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like on the video, leave a comment. We want to raise our engagement with y'all. Leave feedback for us. We always love to get feedback back, see how we can improve. But today, we have a big show planned. We have our NFC North preview. We're going to go through every team in the NFC North, and then we're going to transition over to baseball, and we're going to cover the NBA trade deadline. But joining me from Austin, Texas, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael Ween. What's up?
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Raw Prospect Podcast, episode 113. What a great introduction. I should mention that before I mention anything else, if you have not listened to our first division preview, which was the AFC North, which was just put up a couple days ago, go listen to that. We're also doing a quarterback bracket. The first episode or two is up for that as well. And we'll have much more football content coming for you in the coming weeks as we have hit August. The Hall of Fame game was tonight. There was actual football game on tonight. And the full preseason process, training camps are open, all that sort of stuff. This is our favorite time of year on the podcast because it gives us the most to talk about. But yeah, it's an exciting time. So with all that being said, let's just not waste any time and let's get into this.
Right. So we're going to start off with the Detroit Lions. We're going to go from the bottom to the top based on last year's standings. And the Lions are an interesting case. They had a very busy offseason, but obviously last year they had the first year of their rebuilding phase. And I'd say it was an extremely successful year. There's a lot of, encouraging signs coming out of that Detroit camp. Obviously with their head coach, Dan Campbell, having a, solid first year as head coach, a guy that, the NFL community seems to be rooting for collectively, not just Lions fans. And, they went 3-13, but, a couple things changed here and there. A couple things bounced their way, and they could have won 5 or 6 games. So I think if they were to have won 5 or 6 games, we'd be looking at them completely differently going into this season, given how much they've improved on all parts of their roster. And also the guys that are getting back from injury as well, which will all be covered in this preview. But Michael, I want to start with you. Just go over what you saw from them in the offseason. What moves did you like? What moves you didn't like? And we'll just go from there.
Well, first of all, I want to give credit to Coach Dan Campbell, the head coach of the Detroit Lions, and what he was able to do with this team last year, getting a very subpar roster to 3 wins. They were very competitive towards the end of last season. In fact, the last week they had a touchdown loss to Green Bay. They were in a game with Atlanta. They beat Minnesota. They were in a lot of games down the stretch last year, the point being, and they've only gotten better over the offseason. The thing that stood out to me with the Lions was the draft. Obviously, they had the number 1 overall pick. They had 2 first-round picks, and they drafted 2 impact players that are going to be huge for this team right away. Of course, the number 1 overall, Aiden Hutchinson, or number 2 overall, I'm sorry. Right. I think he's a dream fit in this Lions 4-3 defense. They needed that alpha guy who can get after the quarterback and rush the passer. They got that guy. I'm not sure he'll be superstar, but I think he's going to be a guy who's going to be really productive out of the gates, and he'll be a guy who will be their number 1 pass rusher and really help that pass rush and that defense in general. And then Their second first-round pick, Jameson Williams, I know he's coming back from an injury that he suffered in the college football playoff, but once he gets back, I think he's going to pair nicely with a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown, who was a rookie last year and played very well, and I expect him to take a huge step, but I'll talk about that in a second. But Jameson Williams is another guy I love for the Lions at number 12. Good value there, even though he's coming off injury. And then their second-round pick, Josh Paschal, a versatile defensive end who can rush the passer from inside out. Is also very good at getting off blocks, playing in the run game. Dan Campbell likes, he's got that tough mantra about him. He wants this team to embody a certain style. And I think the guys that they drafted, especially in those early rounds, are going to be impact players right away. So they needed some talent. They needed a young talent inflection to this roster, and they've gotten that the past couple drafts. As far as free agency goes, I don't have the moves right in front of me, but I know they added Deshaun Elliott, who was a good safety with the Ravens. DJ Chark, another solid receiver that they can add to this receiving corps. And there were some others too, but I don't have those right in front of me. Of course, the key loss was Trey Flowers. But yeah, overall, I love what this Lions team did. They have a good running game. We know that. Their offensive line has gotten better. Jared Goff, we don't know his long-term future in Detroit, but we know he can win you games when he has the pieces around him. And they've really gotten better at the receiver position, more explosive there. And I like their defense. They have a young talent inflection on this defense. And I think they're going to be and then I'll let you talk in a second. They're going to stick to their identity. They're going to be a power running football team. They averaged 126.8 rushing yards per game last season. So I think that will continue. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown, along with Jameson Williams, when he comes back from injury, and others like DJ Chark, will be key. That will help Jared Goff in the passing game. And I think their pass rush is going to be better due to their draft picks and also just what they already have instilled on the roster. So, I think they're going to improve. I could see them being a 6-7 win team, being pretty sneaky, but I'll let you say what you want to say now.
Right. The biggest thing to take away from me this offseason for the Lions is they had a really sizable injection of youth this year. Obviously, with all their draft picks, but also they re-signed the guys that they had in-house already. If you look at the wide receivers they kept in-house, Khalif Raymond, and they re-signed as well Josh Reynolds, the guy who played with Jared Goff in L.A. So just the strategic moves where they needed to. They didn't go out and spend a ton of money. They don't need to. But they were smart about every single decision, which is what you want to see from a rebuilding front office. And the key is that they're continuing to build and the momentum is starting to really pick up. And obviously, based on what we see on the field, the expectations will change. But I really am hopeful that this team can be competitive and maybe even just like ruin a couple of contending teams' days here and there. They seem like the kind of team where if someone's sleepwalking and going into Detroit, they're gonna feel it at the very least.
Right. This team is by no means a pushover anymore.
Right.
As it was maybe at the beginning of last season or the season before that. Obviously, the new regime, I think, has helped with Dan Campbell. A lot of people question the hire as the league is moving in sort of an offensive direction. And it's typical nowadays. You're seeing the more of the offensive coaches succeed and get further into the playoffs than maybe say the defensive coaches, with the exception of maybe a guy here or there like a Sean McDermott or a Mike Tomlin or maybe a Bill Belichick. There's only a couple really good defensive coaches that you see getting far in the playoffs nowadays. It's really become an offensive passing league. And to me, the biggest thing that stands out with the Lions is that they've gotten a lot better at the receiver weaponry position with guys like DJ Chark and Jameson Williams added on to a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown, who was a great rookie last year. And you can't forget to mention their great tight end, TJ Hawkinson. It's a luxury in this league to have a really, really good tight end, and he's one of those guys. So I like the guys that Jared Goff is throwing to. I like this offensive line. Penei Sewell has a year under his belt now. I expect improvement from him. Frank Ragnow is a good center. Taylor Decker, really like him as a tackle. I like this offensive line. I like DeAndre Swift as long as he can stay healthy. And Jared Goff, just make the throws you're supposed to make. Don't don't try to do too much. And this offense should be good. And this defense, I think the pass rush will improve, as I said before. In the secondary, they were able to solidify the back line of their defense by re-signing their top safety in the offseason in Tracy Walker. That was a good move. And then their front office was thrilled when Kirby Joseph, talented safety out of Illinois, fell to them in the third round, and he could start right away for them. At least they think he can. So if he makes an impact, and a guy like Jeff Okudah, who they drafted last year, starts to make steps in his development, this team's going to be good. It's going to be competitive. We're not making predictions today, but I'm excited. I think this Detroit rebuild is definitely heading in the right direction. It's ascending fairly quickly, and that's good for the people and the fans of Detroit.
Right. Okay, so let's take a quick look at these draft picks they made this year, and just as a refresher in terms of what we think of these guys, what we think that they will bring to the table. Oh my gosh, can't talk. What we think they will bring to the table, starting with Aiden Hutchinson, who ended up being the second overall pick, but consensus around the league and around NFL minds was say that maybe he should have been the number one overall guy. We'll see in time whether that will be the case. But Aiden Hutchinson is a guy who was extremely consistent in college, and he kind of is just technically sound in every way you can think of. He's extremely adequate athletically, but he doesn't blow you away in that department. But he's so technically sound and has a variety of pass rush moves, and he can transition from speed to power extremely well for a guy his age. And I just think he has a certain maturity about him as a pass rusher as well, which will bode well in terms of transitioning to the NFL level against NFL tackles. So I expect a lot from Aiden Hutchinson's rookie year. Maybe not, all-time level stuff or anything, but I think he will deliver for them as their second overall pick. And then Jameson Williams, who is going to be coming off an ACL injury. The reason we really like this pick was because the fit and the need to win right away isn't there in Detroit right now. So it gives Jamison Williams time to come back when he's completely healthy. At the moment, we don't know when that will be, but last time we checked in with him, there was good signs that he would be in around week 5 or so, but I haven't checked since then, so we'll see. And they added a lot of depth in the later rounds, defensively especially, adding safety Kirby Joseph, as you mentioned, and they also added a bunch of corners in undrafted free agency as well, which will bring depth to their lineup as well. And some of those guys in the NFL, it's a little bit different from the NBA in that some of those guys will compete for roster spots, and some of them will be extremely important in terms of the special teams game. Like those undrafted free agent guys, you're basically getting quality special team snaps for extremely cheap, for free, basically. So that's extremely important, and they did a really good job of it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I love their draft. They made the moves that they had to in free agency, re-signing some of their guys, bringing a couple of guys here and there in on cheap deals. Again, I love the point that you made. There is no really urgency for this team to win right now. They're not in their window quite yet. They're still in this rebuild phase. So drafting a guy like Jameson Williams, you can take those kind of chances on guys that have been hurt but have been ultra productive in wherever they have been in their past, whether that be college or another NFL team. So, yeah, I think their offense got better. The receivers in particular, I think their pass rush got better. I think their secondary is going to get better because a guy like Jeff Okuda, I think, will get better with another year under his belt. Tracy Walker, he stays on that back end as kind of that linchpin in that secondary. And then Kirby Joseph, I think, will make an impact. How big of an impact, I don't know, but he will make this team better in some of the things that he can do and what he's shown on tape. So, yeah, that's what really stands out to me. Before we move on, one thing we should mention is that Ben Johnson, who is their new offensive coordinator in Detroit, who replaced Anthony Lynn, who was the former offensive coordinator, but got fired midway through the season. A lot of people don't know about him, but he was originally hired as a tight ends coach, then was promoted to the passing game coordinator once Dan Campbell took over the play calling duties when Anthony Lynn left. And that really had a huge impact on this offense the second half of the season. From when Ben Johnson took over as the passing game coordinator and Dan Campbell took over the play calling duties, Jared Goff's passer rating went from a 85.3 to a 107 in the weeks where Ben Johnson had more responsibility in calling this offense. And now he's the offensive coordinator. You saw a lot of trick plays, more of a deep ball attack the second half of last year in this offense. And now they have more weapons to go along with that. So I expect to see more creativity. While I still think they'll be more of a run-dominant team, a run-first team, I expect to see more creativity in the passing game with this Detroit offense. And I think that's going to be really beneficial to them.
Right, exactly. Okay, so to finish off with Detroit, let's take a look at their schedule really quickly. Let me get that in front of me. I actually looked it up, but then the page closed out on me. Okay, so they start off week 1 against the Eagles in Detroit. I'd say the notable games on their schedule are more so the division games, because that seems to be the way you're measured when you're a rebuilding team. Can you be competitive against your divisional games? Their first division game is week 3 in Minnesota. Then they have a decently winnable game Week 4 against Seattle. Then they have the Green Bay Packers 3 weeks later in Detroit. Then they go to Chicago to face the Bears. The schedule doesn't look too bad. Like, there's a lot of winnable games here. There's a lot of teams that don't have the highest of expectations going into the year. The Giants, the Jaguars, the Panthers, even the Bears. Those are teams that don't have the highest of expectations. And if the Lions are more competitive this year and take that next step, they can win those games. So I think 5 or 6 games is realistic for this team, and I think the ceiling can even go higher than that if they really find it. I wouldn't necessarily expect that.
Right. A lot of their winnable games, I think, are going to be at home. The thing that really stands out to me, and I'm getting sort of into the minutia of their schedule, but you look at that bye week, week 6. You look at the portion of the schedule, the 5 games before their bye week. Philadelphia at home. Philly was a playoff team last year, but as we saw last year, anything can happen in week 1. So that could be a game I think they could maybe surprise some people, be competitive in, and win, even though I do think Philadelphia got better over the offseason and will be a good team fighting for a wild card berth. But we'll talk about that another time. Washington at home, I mean, that's not impossible to win. At Minnesota, I do think that'll be tough. And at New England, that's always tough. But, I mean, Seattle and one of those 2 first games, if you can come out of those first 5 weeks 2-3, you at least give yourself a fighting chance coming out of the bye week. The point I was going to make is that coming out of the bye week, it gets a little tougher. I mean, at Dallas, that's not easy. Miami at home. Miami, I expect to be a much improved team this year. Could be wrong about that, but I think they'll be better. And then Green Bay. Green Bay has had Detroit's number for a long time now. And until that changes, we got to assume that might continue. I mean, that's not an easy game. So, and then at Chicago. And then Buffalo 2 weeks later. So what I'm saying is you got to manage the first part of your schedule. Be hanging around 500 those first 5 or so weeks so that when you come out of the bye, you're not in a humongous hole. And I know this team isn't looking to win now. They're not really – the expectations of getting to the playoffs aren't there yet for them. But, if you really struggle those first 5 games and then you come out of the bye week and you lose those first 3 games out of the bye week and you're sitting here at 2-7, 1-8, well, then you're back to square one. And that's not what we expect for this Detroit team.
Right. And yeah, that's definitely the worst case scenario. You want to continue to build year over year, eventually to where you get to the point where, you're competing for a Super Bowl. That's the ultimate goal. One thing I do think is interesting, though, is if things do go south, will they be in the market for one of these quarterbacks that will be in the draft next year, like Bryce Young or kid out of
CJ Stroud?
Yeah. CJ Stroud, as well as the kid from Oklahoma, as well as who I was thinking of. But I think he's actually the next year after that. But anyways, that will be interesting to see. And I think even if they aren't, even if things don't go south, they still could be in the market to trade up for a guy since they do have a lot of picks. So that's a thing to watch for the Lions. But, things are looking up in Detroit, and that's not something we've often been able to say in our lifetime. So I think that's always a positive. Okay. Now, moving on to the Chicago Bears here. I'd say the outlook is a little bit more negative for the Bears, just from from the outside looking in as a non-Bears fan, but taking a deeper dive on things, they did make a change at head coach, which was much needed. They hired Matt Eberflus, the defensive coordinator from the Colts. He brought in his all-new staff. He's a defensive-minded guy. And they also changed GMs as well. I don't have the new GM's name right in front of me. But some of the moves they made were interesting, I guess you could say. Some of them I don't really agree with. I think the philosophy as a whole I don't really agree with. And I think the main takeaway here is they're kind of playing the long game here. And as a guy who thinks so you have a young quarterback in the building, I think you should build from there and, do everything in your power to support your young quarterback so that they don't develop bad habits from being behind a bad offensive line or having bad weapons or having to do more because of a bad defense, and Justin Fields is a guy who is prone to those things to begin with. So that's not a thing that I'm super excited to see. But things may work out on the other side of things. I think if they can have this be a 1 year, maybe retooling, I'm open to it. But looking into their offseason here, some of their key departures, I'd say, was obviously Robinson, their number one wide receiver for a long time. They released Tariq Cohen. Sorry for the stuttering, guys. They released Tariq Cohen, their running back for the last few years. They're kind of scat back type. One thing I will say is they did bring in a lot of youth, which I'd say long term may bode well. But the offensive line, I think, will still be an issue. It'll be interesting to see what Tevin Jenkins does in his second year, obviously being injured for most of last year. He was a guy I really liked in that 2021 draft. But I'll transition over to you. What do you think about this Bears offseason? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? And yeah, just give me your key takeaways.
Well, let's start with the positive. We're a positive podcast. We like to be optimistic. Number one, I love what they did in the secondary. We're all stuttering today. It's okay. Chicago, for the past 5 or so years, they haven't had, past half decade to decade or so, they haven't had great quarterback play, but they've always had a really solid defense that's gotten them to the playoffs a couple times. And part of that has been this secondary, which I think is really talented. They used their first 2 draft picks on a guy in Kyler Gordon, who's a cornerback out of Washington, who they got with the first of their 2 second-round picks, and Jaquan Brisker out of Penn State, who's a free safety type, and fills a huge need for them in the secondary to go along with their other safety, who's really good in Eddie Jackson. So you add another quarter, you add a safety to the secondary, you fill some holes in that secondary. I think those 2 guys can be impact players right away. So I do like their secondary. And that injection of youth into that secondary, I do think is needed. So I love that. Number 2, I like what was I going to say? I still like this defensive front. Robert Quinn, I think they may have added through the draft. Let's see here. Yeah, they got a guy, Dominique Robinson, out of Miami. I'm not sure how much he'll play right away. They didn't really address that, but trading away Khalil Mack to the Chargers doesn't help much. but I still think Detroit, Matt Eberflus coming over, more defensive-minded coach, will find a way to make this defensive front gel. And I think they'll still be solid. Maybe not top of the league as they once were, but they'll still be solid. So I still like this defense. The linebacker depth really isn't there right now. That's what I do worry about from a defensive standpoint. Roquan Smith, there's been questions here and there about his, off the field and on the field. He needs to become more productive and make more impact plays if they really want to, take that step defensively. And the number really, what stands out to me from last year is, I remember a couple of years ago, I think it was the Bears, where they forced a ton of turnovers and they were this really opportunistic defense. Well, last year that really changed. They were only able to force eight. They only had 8 interceptions last year. That's a team record low.
Wow.
But looking on the bright side, in Matt Eberflus's 4 seasons as the Colts defensive coordinator, his defense has finished 10th or better at forcing takeaways each year. So maybe they can become a more opportunistic defense. So I like what they did in the secondary. I still like their defensive front, not so much their linebackers or their pass rush, but we'll see about that. So that's the positive.
Right.
I've been a big Justin Fields fan ever since he was at Ohio State. So I want to see him succeed, but I do think it's going to be tough given that this isn't a very good receiving corps that he has. Darnell Mooney's a guy that I really like, but now he needs to prove he can be a real number one, as Allen Robinson has now departed. And, behind Darnell Mooney, it's Belvis Jones, who's a rookie out of Tennessee, who they drafted. Byron Pringle, who is like a 3 or 4 guy in Kansas City, but is fast and can maybe give them some speed. It's just a lot of unproven commodities, whether that be they're young or haven't really been in the positions they are now where they have to step up in bigger roles. So I don't love that. And I still don't love their offensive line. And they didn't really address it. In fact, it got worse as their best guard, James Daniels, left in free agency. And I think they also lost Jason Peters as well. So, and I didn't really see where they really addressed that to make it better. So I don't love their offensive line. I'm not sure Justin Fields can overcome this given the weapons that he has and the offensive line that he has. But I don't know. Detroit's better. Minnesota, I think, is going to be better. And Green Bay's not going anywhere anytime soon as long as they have Aaron Rodgers. So you just look within this division, and I'm not looking at the rest of their schedule, and it's tough sledding for the Bears.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I think you can look at a lot of things in their coaching staff, I think, and feel good about this team for the future. But the one thing this team has always lacked is a quarterback. I mean, even historically, even the years where they made the Super Bowl, some of the quarterbacks they've had have been questionable at best. And, I really do believe Justin Fields can be that guy. And I just don't want them to waste that. I really don't want them to waste that. But only time will tell. Let's dive into the schedule a little bit more. Obviously, you covered it a little bit, but as you said before, the schedule is just brutal. I mean, right away you're facing San Francisco, then Green Bay back to back. Then you have a 2-week lull a little bit in Houston and the Giants, and then you're right back at it with Minnesota, Washington, New England, Dallas, Miami, who are all respectable playoff caliber teams, in my opinion.
I agree.
So I just think it's going to be really tough sledding, and I think they're going to have to really play better on the offensive and defensive lines to even be competitive this season?
Yeah, the one thing I do like, or I like a couple things. Let's finish off this conversation about the Bears with sort of an optimistic view here. Number one is the injection of youth, as you talked about. I think that will serve them well in the long term. But in the short term, I think it's going to be tough sledding, as some of these guys are really inexperienced. You look at their roster, they're going from one of the oldest NFL teams in the league to one of the least experienced, the youngest team, one of the younger teams in the league. Four of their offensive linemen, if you look at their roster, will have started 2 years or less. And that's not great. Justin Fields has 10 starts so far in his career. And really, outside of a Cole Kmet or Darnell Mooney, nobody else in that offensive room, aside from maybe David Montgomery, the running back, has really proven anything. And Darnell Mooney hasn't really proven that he can be the guy, like the main guy, as Allen Robinson was there beforehand. So I don't know. I don't love it offensively. Hopefully the defense can keep this team competitive at least, even if they're not winning a lot of games. I still think that secondary is really good. I think the defensive front is fine. But to finish everything off, the schedule's brutal. I mean, that's really all that needs to be said. You hit that right on the head. It doesn't get – there are a couple lulls here and there, but for the most part, it's pretty brutal. They're facing a lot of playoff teams from last year. I mean, Philadelphia, Buffalo, New England, Dallas, and playoff teams that could be this year, Miami, San Francisco, and so forth. So that doesn't need to be expounded upon. But just a couple things I think the Bears could do that could maybe give them a better opportunity to win some games here this season. Number one, what I mentioned earlier, force turnovers, give this offense a shorter field, be opportunistic defensively. I think that can really help a young quarterback if you get them a couple extra possessions and give them short fields. And as I said, Matt Eberflus, for whatever reason, his defenses have been pretty good about being opportunistic, forcing turnovers. We'll see if that continues. If it does, that could help them in some ways. And number two, this team, for whatever reason, has been really undisciplined the past couple of years. They've been plagued by penalties. They've been one of the most penalized teams in the league the past couple of years, and that needs to stop if they want to have any sort of success this season. So those are two things that if they do the little things, force turnovers, be disciplined, and don't get penalized a whole lot, don't turn the ball over themselves, who knows? But I don't know. I just think it's going to be tough sledding for this year.
Right. I agree. Okay. With that, let's continue on to the Minnesota Vikings, who this offseason made coaching changes as well. And sorry, I got to timestamp this real quick. And they made some key additions in free agency as well in the signings of Zadarius Smith and other players as well. I'm all over the place. But Michael, give me your outlook on the Vikings and what moves did you like this offseason? What moves did you not like? And just what are your takeaways?
Well, I'll try to keep this short. We tried recording this last night. We had some technical difficulties, but we got through the Vikings. And so that was longer than we thought it was going to be. So now I'm going to try to shorten everything I said into more of a concise talking point here. Just a couple general things first, and sort of my outlook for the Vikings. They were 8-9 last year, and they lost a lot of close games and games that they led but should have won. And that could be, for many reasons. But they were 2-5 in games decided by 4 points or less last year. They can turn that around and start winning some of those games that they lost last year. That automatically gets them up to like the 10-11 win range, which is ultimately what I think they'll be. I think they'll be a playoff team, but that's not what we're here to talk about. So win some of the close games, win games you're supposed to win, that sort of thing. I think they'll do better in that department this year. And then number two, obviously, is the coaching change with Kevin O'Connell, who comes from the Sean McVay coaching tree. We heard many reports coming out of Minnesota that when Mike Zimmer was fired, there was a lot of tension brewing between Kirk Cousins and Mike Zimmer, and it just didn't end up working out the way that they envisioned. And I think getting an offensive coach and the way this league is trending with a lot of the weapons that the Vikings have, which I love, and is a reason I think they're going to be fairly competitive, maybe even better than Green Bay this season, is, this philosophy change, going from a defensive coach to an offensive coach. I think that will help Kirk Cousins. He's been consistent year over year over year, has just failed to win the big game. And there's been a lot of questions in late game situations, that sort of thing. I think Kevin O'Connell will help with that. I love their offense, everything about it. They improved their offensive line. Christian Darrisaw now has a year under his belt. Hopefully we'll see steps from him at the left tackle position. A guy they drafted last year out of Virginia Tech. I love what they have on that offensive line. As long as Dalvin Cook stays healthy, Justin Jefferson, Irv Smith is a guy who I think will make an impact. They lost Kyle Rudolph at the tight end position. He's coming back from injury. Adam Thielen and so forth. This offense is going to be explosive. Justin Jefferson's not getting any worse. This offensive line is getting better, and Dalvin Cook, if he stays healthy, the running game we know will be good. And even a guy like Alexander Madison, I think, is a capable backup. So I like the offense. Love that they have an offensive coach now. And then the defense. Obviously, getting Zardarius Smith is the big fish in the free agency. You got to get that number one pass rusher. I think that'll be very good for them. If Danielle Hunter can stay healthy, this pass rush could be pretty good, like really good, I mean. So that could help. And Jordan Hicks is a really underrated move. They need another veteran after they lost Anthony Barr. They needed to bring in another veteran on that inside of that defense. And Jordan Hicks is a guy who's been in the league for 8 years now. He's a tackling machine. He's amassed 128 tackles over the past 3 seasons for the Cardinals. He'll just be a guy that you don't really talk too much about, but he'll make an impact for sure and be a veteran presence in that locker room on the defensive side. My biggest questions defensively for the Vikings are in the secondary. They drafted a couple guys last year. I actually need to look at their draft, but I'll let you talk about that here in a minute. But yeah, I'm not a huge lover of their secondary. Harrison Smith's obviously a guy who's still there. He's the veteran. Patrick Peterson, and then some of the guys that they've drafted recently. Lewis Seen out of Georgia, who's a rookie, and others. I just have some questions at the cornerback position. Who's going to step up here and there? They have a guy they drafted last year. They also got Andrew Booth out of Clemson, but I'm trying to remember who they drafted last year. Maybe I'm thinking of someone else. I don't know. But
I think they did draft a corner last year, but then he got into off-field trouble and they had to cut him. I can't remember his name.
That might be the case because they don't see him on their roster. Otherwise, I would recognize his name.
Right.
But yeah, I think the secondary is sort of a question. But if that defensive line gets better, they have more of a pass rush. That obviously can really be beneficial to your secondary. So, yeah, I really like this Minnesota team. I think they're going to be in the playoffs, but we're not here to talk about that right now. I just like what they did this offseason. I think they're going to be better. A team to watch out for.
Right. I agree. One thing I'd say about the Vikings is the excitement around this offense mostly surrounds the idea of Kevin O'Connell bringing in this Sean McVay style offense over to these two talented receivers, Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. And, in that offense, they play a lot of 11 personnel. It requires the wide receivers to block a ton, three wide receivers, one tight end. It puts a lot of stress on wide receivers being able to block. And there's been a lot of talk about whether Justin Jefferson will play the quote unquote Cooper Kupp role this season. And there's even been quotes from Justin Jefferson himself saying that he could do it and even better than maybe Cooper Kupp could. Obviously, that's yet to be seen, but I think there is some merit to that statement. I mean, Justin Jefferson is extremely talented, and the hype is real, man. I'm really excited to see what this offense can do. Obviously, going into year 2 with Christian Darrisaw at left tackle. Hopefully, they can improve at the guard positions. That's where the question marks have been over these last few years. Has been at the guard positions. Ezra Cleveland is a really athletic left guard, but has his struggles in pass protection, as well as Jesse Davis at right guard. But if those guys can just be passable, that's a weird pun, passable in pass protection, I think this offense can really start to hum in a really amazing way. And then you look defensively. Danielle Hunter, I mean, this is a guy who has been next to nothing in terms of production the last couple of years, it feels like, because he's been injured nonstop. And then before that, he had a suspension. So getting him back is huge. It's like bringing in a star pass rushing free agent. It's extremely important. Having him be paired with Za'Darius Smith automatically brings up the floor of this Minnesota Vikings defense. And I don't know if people are really understanding the magnitude of those two guys can have in terms of this pass rush. I really do think that they can be a top 5 pass rush duo, and I'm very high on these two guys. And then in the secondary, I do think maybe Patrick Peterson can move over to the slot. I think he could. He's shown to be very crafty, and maybe he's not as quick as he used to be, but he's a guy who's a veteran and is extremely technically sound. And I think if they do decide to go that route, then they can move up Andrew Booth into the starting cornerback position on the outside, which will then kind of alleviate some of those second cornerback questions. But I'm not sure they're going to do that. And obviously Andrew Booth Jr. is a rookie, so even if they do go that route, there still is a question of how he will do in the NFL level. So yes, the defense does have some questions, but I do think if those two pass rushers stay healthy, this defense can be solid to good. I think.
Right, and with this offense, this defense doesn't have to be perfect.
Right.
I think they're going to be able to score a lot of points, put a lot of points up on the board with the weapons that they have. Excuse me. As long as they stay healthy. So let's look at their schedule real fast. Their schedule gets easier than it was last year. Last year, they had to face the NFC West and the AFC North, which are two of the better divisions in football. This year, it lightens up just a little bit in that they get to face the NFC East and the AFC East. There are good teams in those two divisions, but let's be honest, it's not the AFC North, and it's not the NFC West for that matter. So I think it gets easier. You look at the actual schedule, it's tough right out of the gate. I mean, Green Bay, Philadelphia, Detroit is a team that we just talked about. They could catch them sleeping. New Orleans isn't a team that should be slept on at all. I think a lot of people are not really talking about them as much as they should.
Exactly.
Chicago at Miami. It's not easy. No NFL schedule is easy. Let's be honest. I mean, this is the NFL that we're talking about with how much parity that we've seen in the league over the past couple of years. I mean, you never know. There's always that surprise team. But I do think the Vikings, if they can figure out a way to win more of these close games, along with getting an extra home game and not having to face those two tougher divisions, I think it bodes well for them to at least get into the playoffs.
Right. I agree. And I think the important thing for the Vikings this year is I think they need to make sure they go into the bye weeks with some momentum because they didn't luck out as much as some of the other teams we're going to talk about today in terms of the bye week. Their bye week is a little bit more early. It's in week 7, and then they have, 10 some odd games after that. So I think it's extremely important that they go into the bye week at least 500. And I think if they are 500, I think they've done relatively well, considering some of the games that they have to play. I think this team could shoot for around, the 11 or 10 win range, which would put them in the playoffs. I think the goal for this team should be to shoot for that division title. And it's a lofty goal, obviously, when you have Aaron Rodgers in the division. But I think with the moves they made, I think they can definitely do it.
Absolutely. So we're about 52 minutes in. Well, let's try to talk about Green Bay within the next 10-ish minutes, and then we'll transition to baseball. So I'll start with you. Just your overall thoughts on Green Bay's offseason.
Well, obviously, Green Bay's been in the news a lot this offseason. Obviously, it started off with the Aaron Rodgers saga, part 2, you could say, where he kind of went into, I guess, hibernation. Wasn't really speaking to anyone within the organization. Nobody really knew what was going to happen. But then things were sorted out. They did end up coming to an agreement on an extension, which in turn opened up cap space for this season. But the problem was they couldn't use the cap space because if you look at their cap chart for next season, they're like $13 million over the cap, and I think their payroll is the 6th highest in the NFL for next year's offseason. So even though they did open up some cap room, they couldn't spend any of it, which was unfortunate because I think this team really needed to plug some holes that they weren't able to fill in the draft. But with that being said, though, I think they did have a very, very good draft. They drafted 3 very good wide receivers, obviously with the headliner being Christian Watson. And I think what they did in the first round as well, People kind of panicked a little bit because they drafted 2 defensive guys. But I think things really did turn out well for them in terms of how the board fell. I think they knew that the wide receiver position was deep this year, and I think I just got to give Brian Gutekunst a lot of credit for staying patient, sticking with his draft board, and just letting the board fall the way, just letting the board fall and just taking the best players available, I should say. So credit to him, and I think the draft is going to pay dividends for them. I think they're going to get a lot of key production from these rookies. I think Quay Walker is really solid, and Devontae Wyatt as well is going to plug up the middle of that defensive line as well. So, yeah, I think given the cards they were dealt, I think they did admirably in the offseason. Obviously, losing a future Hall of Fame wide receiver, Devontae Adams, that's never a good thing. But I think they recovered decently well from it. At the time, I was expecting a little bit more in free agency, considering they did open up that cap space. But, they obviously, in hindsight, they weren't able to spend it. So I think things turned out well.
Yeah, I mean, let's start with, all the positives, and there are a lot of them. Number one is you have a young, uprising offensive head coach who I really like, has proven himself in the regular season. You're going to win a lot of games with this guy. 39-10 so far in 3 seasons as the Packers head coach after taking over for what is the Cowboys coach?
Mike McCarthy.
Mike McCarthy, sorry. Yeah, Packers first team in NFL history to win 13 games, three seasons in a row. So obviously they've been very good from September to December, but it's been sort of a different story in the playoffs. Aaron Rodgers has won 2 consecutive MVPs. He's going to look to do it for a 3rd time this upcoming season. For the first time since Brett Favre did it, and he was a Green Bay Packer. How ironic is that? But yeah, nobody will care ultimately what you do in the regular season if you ultimately can't do more in the playoffs. And that's what's been so disappointing with this team. 2020, in that home loss to Tampa Bay, the 31-26 loss, it was a mistake on the part of Matt LaFleur, settling for a late game field goal in that loss, which was a questionable call on his end. And then last year, it was a special teams fiasco, let's say, that really cost them that loss to San Francisco in the NFC divisional round at home. And these losses have come at home, a place where Green Bay was once almost invincible in the playoffs. And my point is, Rodgers, he's a fantastic quarterback. I'm not disputing that. He's still top 5 in the league, playing at a high level. But all these regular season marks, all these regular season statistics, all these regular season coaching wins for Matt LaFleur really don't mean anything if you can't get back to the Super Bowl within this short window that you still have with Aaron Rodgers. And that's really what the expectation should be in Green Bay. Since they won the Super Bowl in 2010, Rodgers is 7-9 in the playoffs. 4 of those losses have come at home at Lambeau Field. So it's all about the playoffs for Green Bay, in my opinion. And when I say that, and I look at the moves that they made in this offseason, I just have a lot of questions about whether I know they'll get there because they play in a relatively easy division. Minnesota will be tough, but I trust them they can get one of those games. And as long as you split with Minnesota, I believe you could go 5-1, 4-2 in your division. You still have a good enough defense to where you can win games and get into the playoffs. I mean, this defense is going to be great. It was one of the best in the league last season. You drafted a couple guys that will make impacts right away. You do lose Darius Smith, but I think they have the assets and the pieces that they need to supplement that loss in a way that doesn't hurt them too much. But when I look at this offense and what's winning playoff games in today's league, I mean, did you watch the playoffs last year? It was a fireworks show, especially, for most of that playoff run. And a lot of the teams that were in the playoffs, they all had, I mean, the Bengals, the Rams, the Chiefs, the Bills. I mean, these teams all have the ability to be explosive offensively, and there are just a lot of question marks now that you don't have Devontae Adams, who, I mean, he was 34% of Green Bay's receiving yards last year. It's over a third, 30% of the receptions, and 29.7% of Aaron Rodgers' targets went to Devontae Adams. Now you take that out of the equation. And he was a guy that obviously you mentioned is going to be in the Hall of Fame, ranking top 10 in franchise history in almost every meaningful receiving statistic category. I just don't think the passing game is going to be quite the same without him. Now, look, I'm an optimistic guy. I hope Christian Watkins can be a guy that makes an impact right away and proves me wrong. I hope Alan Lazard can step up in a way that I really don't foresee him doing in a bigger role. He's a solid receiver, don't get me wrong, but now he's going to be asked to do more. We'll see how he responds to that responsibility. Randall Cobb is a guy that's been there a lot. And I do like the fact that they still have him, just so Rodgers has a guy that he can trust, because that's another one of my questions is what is the trust dynamic between Rodgers and a lot of these younger receivers? Because he's really never worked all that well with younger receivers during his career. So what is that going to look like? Offensive line is still good. It's, it's good. Their offensive line has always been good. No complaints there. You still have Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. You probably have one of the best 1-2 punches at the running back position there is in today's NFL. In my opinion, A.J. Dillon's fantastic. He could start for a lot of other teams. And Aaron Jones, of course, multiple-time, Pro Bowler, and is a great receiver out of the backfield. So that could help them. But yeah, that's my main question. Just what is this? What does the Devontae Adams loss do? Can they win playoff games with the weapons that they have? Because I've watched the playoffs the past couple of years. You got to have proven commodities at the wide receiver position. And you got to have a level of faith in these receivers if you want to win playoff games. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the defense is good enough to carry them to a Super Bowl, but I don't know. I know we're not supposed to be talking about playoffs and expectations, but this is what the season is about for Green Bay. I'm sorry. It's not about the regular season anymore. It's about the playoffs. So.
Right, exactly. This team, I don't know, man. They're going to be so interesting to watch. I mean, there's so many storylines there. There's almost just not enough time to even touch on them all. I mean, the receiver room is a story all in itself. I mean, they not only drafted Christian Watson, who's a question mark just because he comes from a smaller school, but he's extremely athletic. He's extremely talented. And then they also drafted Romeo Doubs, who is a wide receiver out of Nevada, and I think can provide some production, but there's also question marks with him as well, just because all of these rookie wide receivers have to develop that trust, and they don't have that much time to do it. And this team, if it's going to operate at a Super Bowl caliber level, they're going to have to develop that chemistry extremely quickly. So a lot of that's going to go on Aaron Rodgers, and we'll see how it goes, man. I'm really excited to watch this team. That's the bottom line.
I am too. Last thing I'll say is, from an optimistic standpoint, even though I don't know if they have the explosiveness that they need now to maybe go deeper into the playoffs, and Minnesota is going to be, I think they're going to be pretty darn good. I'm not going to give away any of my predictions, but they have a really explosive offense. And if they end up winning the division, let's just say they do. I'm not predicting it. Let's just say they do. Well, then now you don't even have home field advantage anymore, which is sort of what you've been relying upon the past couple of years, even though it hasn't even worked out for you. So now you're going on the road to play playoff games with a young receiving corps. Not a very, I don't know. But from an optimistic standpoint, dominant defense. I expect them to have a really, really good defense, top 5 caliber defense. And when Green Bay has had a top 5 defense, it's only happened 5 times over the past 30 years. 2 of those seasons, they won the Super Bowl. So maybe the defense and more of a running game, which I think is something to look out for as well. They've been a very pass-reliant team the past couple years. Maybe they run the ball more with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. They ran the ball only 39% of the time last year. I expect that number to increase dramatically. So maybe it's one of those teams where you have a really good defense. You don't have to score a ton of points. You're more of a smash mouth team. You run the ball more. And there's more of a play action type thing where Aaron Rodgers doesn't have to make as many plays, and the receivers just got to make plays when you got to have it. If that's the formula, well, then maybe, depending on a couple of breaks here and there, they could get to a Super Bowl. I mean, they still have Aaron Rodgers. He's Aaron Rodgers. So you still have a chance. But I'm just not sure with this offense right now. That's all I'm going to say.
Right, exactly. Okay, I think with that, we'll transition over to baseball, unless you have anything to add just overall with the division.
Not really. I think maybe we take a quick look at Green Bay's schedule to finish this off.
All right, yeah, I have that open here.
Let's see. Wow, they did not get a good break here. Their bye is not until week, what would that be? There's 18 weeks now, so their bye isn't even until week 13.
Wow.
Or 14. I don't like that, but I do think they can win a lot of these games earlier in their schedule. Chicago, New England's a winnable game at Lambeau. Giants are a winnable game. The Jets are a winnable game. Washington's a winnable game. Detroit has always been a winnable game for Green Bay. There are some tougher games mixed in there, but I think the schedule overall is fine. I just don't like the bye week being week 14 or 13, whatever
14,
that is.
Right, 14. Yeah. Yeah, there's obviously a lot of marquee games when you have a guy like Aaron Rodgers on your roster. Obviously going into Tampa Bay week 3, that's going to be pretty difficult. And then turning around and playing New England the next week. And then later on in the year, week 8 at Buffalo. And then obviously a game that I'm looking at later in the year is going to be versus the Rams at home in week 15 on Monday Night Football. That's going to be an incredible game. So a lot of, huge like NFC games on their schedule. And if they can steal a couple of those, I think it not only will bode well for, positioning, but also I just think they got to steal a couple so they can have that room for error over Minnesota.
Absolutely. So I think that will wrap it up for our NFC North preview. We're about an hour, 10 minutes in. So for the next 10-ish minutes, I want to talk about what happened at the MLB Trade Deadline.
Right.
We obviously have to start with the marquee name that was available, Juan Soto, who ended up on the last day of the deadline, ended up being traded to the San Diego Padres, who was a team that we mentioned a couple episodes back as a possible destination
Right.
for Juan Soto. So I'll just start with you, Emmy. Any thoughts on Juan Soto being traded to the Padres for one of the biggest returns we've ever seen? A huge package of prospects and a couple major league players in Luke Voigt and Eric Hosmer. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy who's, 23 years old. And, as we've said before on this podcast, I mean, he's proven to be extremely consistent, and just he's probably like one of the highest value players that has ever been on the trading block. And the package that the Nationals got back really shows that, really proves that. Um, I obviously don't know much about the other players the Padres got back as well, but the just having the trade in front of me is just insane. I mean, the Nationals got back like 20 guys. It's insane.
Right. And they had to. Or otherwise they weren't going to trade him if they didn't get the package that they wanted. But it was clear to me that they really coveted the package of prospects plus the major league talent that San Diego was offering in return. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made this deal, and they would just waited to the offseason to trade him. There were some other teams in the running, of course, the bigger market teams who were sort of on the periphery taking a look in conversations with the Padres, but nothing got serious. The Yankees, the Dodgers. And then there were the teams that were a little more serious, wanted to go for it now. Pretty good teams that need to take that next step. The Cardinals in the NL Central, and then the Padres, who are in the same division as the Dodgers. So, yeah, there were some other teams, but ultimately, what stands out to me is that the Nationals really coveted what the Padres were offering in return. They got a massive return with, I believe, 6 or 7 prospects. They built that farm system. I mean, these are guys that they could use in other trades moving forward to, sort of jumpstart their rebuild, or guys that could come up and possibly make an impact on their major league team. Who knows? I think that's good to have a great farm system, especially if you're a rebuilding team like the Nationals. There's not really urgency to win in Washington right now because although it sucks trading away a guy like Juan Soto, who was a guy they were trying to build around, you just got a World Series title a couple of years ago. So, there's not as much urgency as, say, maybe some other places in the league right now to win in Washington. So that's why you can make this move. And it hurts just a little less. But it still hurts trading away Juan Soto. And that's where we'll get to Juan Soto. Look, in terms of value, in terms of a lot of things here, age, he's only 23, projection, what he's projected to be moving forward. He's only going to get better, and he's already historically good at his age. Production so far has already proven that he can hit in the playoffs off of elite pitching, the best there is. Already proven he can hit 300, hit for contact, hit for power, do everything. In his contract situation, you look at, even though he's looking for a big extension, San Diego gets him for the rest of this year, all of next year, and all of the year after that before they even have to think about giving him a contract extension. So if you really think about that, you get 3 playoff runs with this generational talent before you even have to think about paying him. Now, obviously, it'd be nice to lock him up right now so you don't have to worry about that down the road. And you can sort of start to supplement this roster with whatever money you have left remaining after you do that. Because now you're going to have Tatis and Juan Soto under contract long term. But you get 2.5 years of control before you even have to think about paying him. And he's, in terms of value, absolutely, in my opinion, the most valuable MLB player ever to be traded. I don't even need to know the history of baseball to say that. This is Juan Soto that we're talking about. I mean, this is a guy who is probably going to be the best player in the league for the next 10 years if he stays healthy. And that's not an exaggeration. And you have him and Tatis now. And Tatis hasn't even played this season. So, I mean, it's hard not to love this from a San Diego perspective. And on top of all that, you kept him away from the Dodgers, your division rival. So you got better in that respect. While the Dodgers sort of stood pat this deadline. And, they're still a really good team. They're a World Series contender. I don't blame them for that. They've been really aggressive in years past, and they didn't feel the need to go after anyone on this trade market. But on top of all that, you got the Nationals to throw in another really good MLB player that can help this team right away, and Josh Bell, a first baseman who's hitting over 300 this season and is a great power hitter. So you got 2 really good pieces in this lineup now, along with Fernando Tatis, along with all these other guys, Jake Cronenworth and so forth. Man, I don't know how much better it can get from a Padres perspective.
Right. It's hard to put in perspective. I mean, how many players they got back unless you have it in front of you. I mean, it's an unbelievable haul that they sent out for Juan Soto, but I think it will end up being 100% worth it. And we'll see what they can do the rest of the season. I think you have Soto in the lineup. He immediately adds star power. And then once Tatis comes back, you can hit the ground running and maybe make a push to get an even higher positioning for the playoffs, which is all that matters.
Absolutely. But those are conversations we'll have a little bit down the road.
Right.
Just in some other deadline notes, the Yankees and the Astros, who have to this point this season been the 2 best teams in the American League by far. They made moves to get better. Both of them did. The Astros, they went out and acquired a couple impact pieces. Catcher Christian Vasquez with the Red Sox, who's more of he gives you more of a threat at the plate from a catcher's perspective, whereas the other guy, Martin Maldonado, is more of a defensive-minded catcher. So now you have that kind of 1-2 punch at the catcher position. And then Trey Mancini, who's a veteran guy, veteran bat at first base. I think he'll help this offense as they've had some problems at first base. Ludger Scurriel hasn't been performing like they expected him to, so I think he'll help there. And then their pitching is fantastic. So the Astros got slightly better, adding a piece here and there. The Yankees, on the other hand, obviously they had a weird deadline. They added Frankie Montas, who was the ace of the Oakland A's. They needed some pitching. So hopefully he can slot in right behind Garrett Cole as that bona fide number 2 starter for the playoffs, along with a guy like Luis Severino. So hopefully that makes the rotation better. Andrew Benintendi an outfielder, just a complete upgrade over what they were getting out of Joey Gallo. They got rid of Joey Gallo. Benintendi's a Gold Glove outfielder, hitting 320. They really needed a contact bat. He doesn't hit much for power, but he's another contact bat that I think can be really beneficial for the Yankees come postseason time. And then a couple bullpen pieces as well. You can never have enough pitching. So I like what both those teams did at the deadline. They're two of the better teams in the two of the best teams in the American League, and they'll continue to be that way, barring major injuries. So yeah, that's really all I have to say.
Right. Yeah. For me, I'd probably have a lot more to say about the Yankees than I did with the Astros. I mean, to me, the Astros, they made a few moves around the edges to kind of help out, the depth, as you said. But the Yankees, to me, I think really impressed me at the deadline because I think they're one of those teams that, like the Dodgers, could have easily been, complacent and had a false sense of security. So I really do give them credit because they've been the best team in baseball, really. And they have a dude in their lineup who's on track for 60 home runs, Aaron Judge. They have 4 starting pitchers. I mean, their team is already extremely good, but they found a way to improve. And, anytime you can do that at deadline, when you're already a team of their caliber is extremely impressive. So I definitely do give them credit. I think that's kind of all I really have to say about it. I don't really have any real analysis other than they really have started to value lineup balance more, which is a really good sign.
Right. Real quick before we sign off, you mentioned that guy in their lineup who's on pace for 60 home runs, Aaron Judge. He is actually on pace for 68 home runs, which is one off the pace of Barry Bonds when he hit 73 back in the early 2000s. So it's gonna right now he's at 43. There's about 58, 59 games left in the regular season. So if he plays every one of those at this current pace, he'd probably get to around 65. I don't know if he can get way up there into the high 60s because he's going to go into a couple days slump here and there. Nobody hits consistently for the entire season, but nevertheless, he's going to hit 60 plus. So be on the lookout for that as we come down the stretch. Just how many home runs he can hit. It's pretty impressive. And the crazy thing about it is he's in a contract year. He's doing this in a contract year. So that's going to be really interesting to see what happens.
Wow.
In the off season.
I can't imagine a scenario where he leaves, but
you never know.
So wild. Oh my goodness. Leaving a franchise like the Yankees, but I don't know, man. Not going to rule it out, but I think that's going to do it for today's episode, guys. Thanks so much for watching. We'll be back. I think by the time this goes up, the round 2 and 3 of the QB bracket that we mentioned earlier will be up. Make sure to check that out. I think that was a really fun episode. I brought 2 guests on from my golf team, and I think I think that the chemistry on that podcast was really, really good. So be sure to check that out. And yeah, I'll let Michael sign us off here.
Yeah, so that's about it. Be sure to check those episodes out, like, subscribe. We'll be back relatively soon, early next week. Our next divisions are going to be the West divisions, AFC West and NFC West. I don't know which one will come first. We'll figure that out, but nevertheless, we'll also have college football that we'll start to talk about. And then, of course, the baseball season goes on. and some other extraneous things like golf and F1, possibly on the podcast as well. So be on the lookout for all that.
Maybe a Patreon pod as well for those types of things.
Exactly.
Right.
So be on the lookout for all that. And until then, I guess just like Devontae Adams' time in Green Bay, we are gone.
Peace out.
Peace.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed that video, make sure to click on one of these two videos right here, our latest video right here on the left, or the video YouTube recommends for you on the right.